This seems like a lot of
standards.
Rather have something.
Anyhow, there's a lot of interesting stuff coming.
I did, I totally did.
But I can understand how some schedule was.
So the commissioners coming
They don't know.
at the March. Council meeting.
For as long as I can do this evening.
We're covered.
So we lost the number.
Oh.
Well,
Someone resigned, right?
yeah. Okay. Well, there's,
And
Fern, I didn't, he didn't.
They're not beating down the door down.
I don't know why. It's such an exciting site. You guys meet like at least half a year. You guys are detail. I feel bad for Councilor Sonny and Councilor Michelle. I've been having 2 meetings. And I like telling him it's not.
Actually, you got extra large, or large, medium, small.
Maybe what's
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Now, they place you guys perfectly lined up here.
Oh, that makes sense. Procedurally, as we told them, yeah, just go sit up there. Oh, great. I mean, just everybody come on down. Perception. Mike, can you hear us?
And Councilor office on.
Yeah, no. So, everybody's yours. I can hear you. Oh, wait, I'm right here. So I'll go ahead and let everybody know, Colleen and I were just talking about the public hearing portion. So since technically this can be appealed to council during the public hearing portion, council members should technically
That's fine by me.
remove yourself and then go back up there when it's all done.
Which made sense to me. I thought about the exact same thing. I usually don't attend these because we are the escalation point. Not that I've ever doubt what you guys are doing.
Advise and consent portion.
So should we come down that? Or just?
When we're getting ready to open the public hearing.
2 ways out.
I need to know if they can hear us out there because nobody's responded.
Do you need a roll call, Vicky, or are we good?
I don't need a roll call. I just need somebody to answer me online if they can hear us.
I can hear you, Vicky.
There you go. I was gonna say, ask Councilor on there.
It is. Yeah.
So, okay, you guys are ready to go?
All right, I have 6:02 on February 18th. I will go ahead and call us to order. First thing up is pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
I'd like to welcome everybody, including council members, for the joint meeting. We have a couple of housekeeping things to do, which our first item up is to appoint a new chair.
You're really gonna do it?
I think you can do it. I have been nominated.
I nominate Glenn Cole.
Are there more nominations?
No, you're good. Yeah, fist by right.
All right, well, I'll accept. All those in favor, continuing with me as chair? Like it or not?
Aye.
Carries, thank you.
Who was on that? That's Councilor Goff.
Okay, so, next up is, And I will take nominations on that.
Nominated Phil.
I didn't do a good job last time. I was all lost and stuff. I don't do good public speaking, but, I guess being nominated, I might work on it a little bit.
Second time's the charm.
I'll second
You
that.
got that under your belt now.
Have a nomination and a second. Any other nominations? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Welcome aboard. Again, yep, you did great. If everybody's had a chance to look at the meeting minutes for November 19th and December 17th of 24, I am looking for motion to approve those two.
Motion to approve.
Second that.
Motion to second, any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Those carry. Next up is a public hearing, probably housekeeping.
Yeah.
I'm assuming, or I'm guessing,
We'll step out in the hall.
city council needs to, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you can stay in here, yeah, as long as you declare it if it comes to you,
Okay.
yeah.
I only listen.
Right.
No opinion.
Okay, so a conditional use permit file CU 2025 -02, City of Hubbard Well, project number one project. Are we taking these all as one hearing? Okay. Partition PAR 2024-02, major variant, or excuse me, major variance VAR 2024-04, minor variance VAR 2024 -05. With that, are we ready to start that script then? Because that is numerous.
It's just one script.
I know it's just one script. Okay, good evening. My name is Glenn Holm. I'm Chair of the Hubbard Planning Commission. I will be presiding over this hearing. This is the time and place set for the public hearing in the matter of City Well number one project, concurrent land use application, conditional use permit, CUP 2024-02, partition, PAR 2024-02, major variance, VAR 2024-04, and minor variance, VAR 2024-05. This hearing is now open. It is 6:06 p.m. Oregon land use law requires several items to be read into the record at the beginning of every public hearing. The city planner will review this material. Your patience is appreciated as she goes through these statements.
Thank you, sir. This on, excellent. The applicable substantive criteria upon which this case will be decided are found in the Hubbard Development Code, sections 2.104, which is the residential commercial zone, section 2.200, general development standards, 2.208, development standards for land divisions, 3.103, conditional use permits, 3.104, variances, and 3.106, partitions. All testimony and evidence received during this public hearing must be directed toward these approval criteria or to such other rule, law, regulation, or policy which you believe to apply to this case. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to the City Council or the Land Use Board of Appeals shall be raised not later than the close of the record at or following the final evidentiary hearing on this case. Such issues shall be raised with and accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford this body and the parties to this hearing an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue. This public hearing will proceed with the staff report and any other comments from governmental agencies in attendance, followed by the applicant and all those in support of the application. All those opposed will then be allowed to speak, followed by those with general comments or neutral. Finally, the applicant will be entitled to a rebuttal period. Please state your name clearly for the record before your comments. Staff will need your legal mailing address before or after you speak. Please try to avoid repetition if someone else has already expressed the same thoughts. It's perfectly all right to state that you agree with the statements of that previous speaker. If you have documents, maps, or letters that you wish to have considered by this body, they must be formally placed in the record of this proceeding. To do that either before or after you speak, please submit the material to city staff. Prior to the conclusion of the first hearing on a land use application, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence or testimony regarding the application. If such a continuation request is made, it will be up to this body to determine if the hearing will be continued to a time and date certain, or if the record will be kept open for the submission of additional evidence. Thank you.
With that out of the way, I need to ask the audience and fellow commissioners a few questions. One, does any member of the audience have any objections to the notice that was provided? Number two, does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the planning commission to hear this matter? Number three, does any member of the planning commission wish to declare a potential or actual conflict of interest or bias? Number four, does any member of the planning commission wish to report any any visits or ex parte contacts? And number five, does any member of the audience wish to challenge the impartiality or ex parte disclosures of any member of the planning commission? No, we'll move on. City Planner Holly Byram, if you would please give the staff report.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, my name is Holly Byram and I work for the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments. In this role, tonight, my goal is to help the Planning Commission understand the decision criteria that apply to this case. This is actually 4 different concurrent land use applications submitted. And the applicant is the city of Hubbard. The purpose of this project is to establish a new well and well house on the subject properties. And because the property boundaries here are a little unusual, I provided a lot of visuals so you can understand the lay of the land here. What's being proposed is that 2 existing parcels are partitioned into 3 total, and this would create a new approximately 5,000 square foot parcel for the purpose of the well and the well house. And so the property owner is working in partnership with the city of Hubbard. If this goes as planned, the city would then purchase the new parcel from the property owner for that new public facility. Because of the residential commercial zoning on these properties, that is the reason for the conditional use permit. All public facilities require a conditional use permit to ensure that the neighbors have an opportunity to review and comment if they have any concerns. So the visuals that are provided on the first few pages of the application show a very small well house, and that would be, I believe it's 112 square feet in size, no more than 12 feet tall. And then there would also be 2 new parking spaces proposed for employee parking on site. So overall, a very small footprint of a project there. The reason there are variance applications submitted concurrently is because the resulting size of the 2 parent parcels are smaller than what is required as a minimum lot size for multifamily housing. So the 2 parent parcels have multifamily complexes of 4 units each, and so there's a minimum lot size for those. So I've included the decision criteria for each of those applications in here. I don't want to belabor the point here, but essentially for conditional use permits, we have to ensure that we're not causing an undue impact on the neighboring properties here. There's no significant impact expected from the proposed public facility here. Again, it's a very small footprint. In terms of the partition, the applicant has provided the preliminary review plat. And then we've also provided the percent variances required for the 2 resulting parcels. So again, going from 2 parcels to 3, remaining parcel 1 after the partition would be a 23% variance, and remaining parcel 2 after the partition would be a 10% variance. And that is the reason for the major and minor variances required with this partition. There's no significant public improvements proposed or required with this application. This property has frontage on Second Street, and Second Street has an existing sidewalk and curb line there. The small parcel would take access off of the existing shared driveway that serves the multifamily development. So no concerns there. No right-of-way dedication would be required on either Second Street or First Street. Second Street's already 60 feet wide and First Street's 50 feet wide, and those are accurate for their street classifications as a collector and a local street respectively. When parcel 2, which has frontage on First Street, was formed back in 2019, I'm sorry, 1995, they dedicated right away at that time. So let's see here. The variance criteria essentially ensures that the variance being sought is the minimum necessary for this purpose, and that it's not granting any special privileges or uses to the applicant that aren't available to other properties in the area. A public facility like this is a pretty unusual land use, and so it doesn't squarely fit within property rights enjoyed by all property owners in this area. However, the impact would be minimal here. So let's see, at the end of the staff report here, there's a couple recommended conditions of approval. They're pretty straightforward, and they just provide the expiration dates for each of those land use types. There are conditions in there about lighting to ensure that the lighting isn't impacting the neighboring residents. There's a condition in there about backing distance. We just want to make sure that those parking spaces serving the well house have sufficient backing distance. And same as the parking that's existing on the other side of the driveway. Standard language in there about any future fences and building permits. The applicant's always responsible for recording the final partition plat at the county. There's a note in here about the shared driveway. So that is an existing shared driveway, and that we would expect to see the partition plat have a note granting access to new parcel 3 on that shared driveway. Okay. So that concludes the staff report on these applications. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, but overall staff recommends approval for the 4 concurrent land use applications tonight.
You have a question? Go ahead.
I do.
Yes, sir.
So with the 2 fourplexes on there, is there a minimum amount of, I realize the lot that would become where the well is a designated play area, but I assume with 8 units there's some children, and they use that area probably as a play area. Will changing the lot size change any needs for any sort of open area depending on how many units there are?
That's a good question. And it's not entirely clear to me whether part of that parcel would still remain publicly accessible. That might be a good question. Maybe Melinda can help us with that answer. Whether that lawn area around the well house could still be used.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I can go ahead and answer
Thank
that. So there was initially a long time ago when that structure was first built, there was supposed to be playground equipment installed there in a little playground area for children. That did not ever happen. And so the grass area remains. There still would be access for children to play in the grassy area. So there still is that. Again, the playground equipment or requirement that was approved 25 plus years ago, that never actually happened. So we're not going to go back and try and enforce that. But there still will be some grass area.
So the intent of this 5,151 square foot parcel is to have a 112 foot square foot building and 2 parking spaces on it.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest would remain open for kids to run around, play tag, whatever, if they want to.
Yeah, we'll have to secure that area, but yeah. Right, correct.
That is correct.
We have to follow the emergency management security for public facilities like that. But I know our project team, we've spoken about whether or not we have to fence the whole entire lot or just secure the actual building, which it being a locked facility may satisfy that requirement, so.
And I realize they're not busy streets right there, but if there's less place to play, kids are gonna they'll find themselves out in the streets a little more often.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, that would be my question. I mean, I'm just thinking in the back of my mind, security wise. If there is ever a change in security requirements for wellheads for municipalities, which is a likelihood that could happen, does this become, essentially a fenced, just a fenced area around that? I know that's a hypothetical, but.
Right, a little bit difficult to answer that 100%, but in theory, I believe that, and our engineering team can speak to this as well, but I believe that that still could potentially be satisfied with the fencing directly around the building, because the footprint of the actual well building is going to be small.
Yeah.
So there's still the open space around that still to be determined if we would have to fence that entire lot, but I don't believe that would be the case.
Okay.
So, and I can say in similar circumstances, I actually toured one over the weekend, in the city of Albany, and they were required to put fencing around for various other reasons. And it was literally just like a 3-foot setback from the building structure all the way around.
Okay.
The parking was not required to be within the fence. It was just the actual building.
So that footprint was pretty small then.
It was
For
very
the
small.
fenced area, okay.
Was it required by an insurance company or by their laws?
It was actually required under their code, their
Okay.
planning commission codes. Mhm.
Any other questions of staff before we move forward? And accept public testimony? Thank you, Holly.
Absolutely.
All right, so I will now accept public testimony regarding this case. Does the applicant or representative have any more that they would like to? I know this is in-house, but do you have anything to add, Sean?
No, we're very excited about the potential of moving this well to another location where well 1 currently has failed and is currently not operational. This will just create some additional redundancy. So we're very optimistic that this is the best use of property in Hubbard.
And I will add to that as well. So
Sure.
our project team actually did scope out different areas. So this wasn't just the only place that was looked at and evaluated for this well site. And based on the requirements for setbacks and circumference of how far you have to be from certain things, this was the least intrusive and best option for sure, without a doubt, for property, so.
I'm not versed in water rights for municipalities, but does the property have any bearing on water rights?
So, I guess I'm a little
Yeah.
confused about the property.
So water
itself.
rights generally follow the property. I didn't know, I'm not versed on if they're, if you're followed under the same purview as, the private sector in terms of water rights. And so I didn't know if this piece of property had any historical water rights on it.
No, so this would then fall or default under the city water rights.
Okay.
And we don't want to jeopardize that. We actually have a very liberal water rights.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we don't want to be without a well too much longer, because then we could potentially lose those, so.
Yeah. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and part of the project is actually working with the state and water resources as well to establish the rights in the new location for the well.
Okay, cool. So those rights that were on the other one can follow to the new one. Okay, that makes a lot more sense then to me, so.
Anything more? Okay, proponents, is there anyone who would like to speak in support of the application? Opponents, is there anybody who would like to speak in opposition to this application? Neutral parties, is there anybody who would like to speak either for or against the application? We'll open it up for applicant rebuttal. Since we've done no other things, is there anything else you want to impress upon us?
No, thank you, Chair. I think the city has presented their findings to the commission, and we're ready for your determination.
Any questions from planning commission?
Kids are saying murders are able to do it.
Yeah.
All right, before I close or continue the public hearing, are there any other questions from the planning commission or staff of anyone? As a reminder, once I close the hearing, only commissioners or staff may speak. So we will go ahead and close the public testimony or the public hearing at 6:24. And I would entertain discussion on the application or a motion.
I move to approve the application, all three variances.
I would second.
Clarify, are there 3 or 4?
4 applications.
Sorry, or all four.
Okay, and you'll go with that modification of
Yes.
the motion, okay? And you,
And I'll continue to second.
okay,
So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries.
Yeah.
All right, so that moves us along on our agenda to item number 6, which is a joint work session to discuss compliance with housing bills. And with that, hand it over to me. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, outside of this, in terms of leading this, Holly, I'm assuming you'll be leading the discussion on this? Okay, then I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
See.
Okay, well, in front of you, fine folks, this evening, you have a staff memorandum from my colleague, Scott White. He is a planner at the Council of Governments, and he's been kind of our in-house expert on all things housing bills. Unfortunately, his elderly mother is ailing, and he is down out of state helping her with some things this week, so he cannot be here this evening. I will let you know that I am not a housing bills expert. However, I will present this information to you and I will collect any unresolved questions this evening. So this is the beginning of our discussion. It will go through work session and then a few public hearings. And so we have plenty of time to ensure that all your questions are answered. Let me grab my notebook here and make sure I capture those questions. Thank you. Okay. So over the past few years, there's been a couple of legislative packages that have put mandates on cities, specifically related to housing provision in the state of Oregon. And at COG, we understand how these unfunded mandates are a major hassle for local governments. And so my supervisor McCray reached out to DLCD last year and she said, you know what, how about we package all these local communities together? You give us some funding, we'll do the code updates and just get it all done. And so that's what we're doing. All these small communities are getting done all this year, and this summer is our deadline. And so we're just marching through the steps. What Scott has provided to you this evening is an overview summary of some of the key pieces of legislation that we're discussing this evening. The first of which is Housing Bill 3395. And just to hit a few key highlights from this housing bill. We have a lot of text on these slides, but the highlights that you need to know is that you are triggered by population. The population trigger is 2,500, and so that ensures that your city has to adopt ordinances that would allow duplexes on any parcel that would allow a single family home. This is a tough pill for a lot of small cities to swallow. Essentially what this looks like, I'll show you, or you've probably reviewed in Exhibit A, is that your minimum lot size for single family homes are essentially your minimum lot size for duplexes as well. And no longer will there be restrictions on, in some of Hubbard zones, it says duplexes on corners only, or only as a certain percentage of an overall development. And so now it's just straight out, any lot that allows a single family home would allow a duplex. So you'll see that revision in your Exhibit A. There's also provision in here for single room occupancy, or SRO developments. And I know that when I was an undergrad, I rented a house that I shared with a few of my college friends. And that's essentially the feeling of what a single room occupancy might provide. These are individual locking rooms, and the tenants of those rooms have shared restroom and kitchen facilities. I'm not sure if this is in high demand in smaller communities, but this has been added to development codes now around the state as a housing type that we allowed anywhere essentially that single family dwellings are allowed. And then finally on this slide, he mentions that affordable housing can be permitted in commercial zones. There are some restrictions on that. We can get into the details on that. The next piece that he highlights is House Bill 4064. And this was actually back in 2022, and this was related to manufactured homes to ensure that manufactured homes are not being treated differently than stick-built homes. And so what this says essentially is that you can't apply standards to manufactured homes that don't apply to stick-built homes. In the past, there have been some design requirements that cities had applied to manufactured homes, but no longer can we do that. And currently, Hubbard does not have design standards for any homes. Something you could explore for the future, certainly. The next piece is House Bill 3197. And this, again, was a couple years ago. You've probably heard the phrase before, clear and objective criteria. And this says essentially that any local regulations that apply to housing development have to be clear and objective. They can't provide discretion to local decision makers. And again, the intent here was to ensure that housing had an expected path forward through the development approval process and that it could be done swiftly. So those are the main items. Let's see what else he has provided for us here. Okay, so in Exhibit A, he has included some recommended, he did a complete audit of the Hubbard Development Code, and he has some recommended changes to your code. The system that he has used is strike through for any text that is proposed to be removed and highlighting in bold for any text that is proposed to be added. I typically don't use colors because some people are colorblind and it doesn't photocopy well, but we can use underlining in the final draft when we go to public hearing. But if we can look at Exhibit A, do you all have a copy of that? Okay, wonderful. I'll go through this briefly. It's 55 pages long. We don't have to talk about every section. The purpose of tonight is really just to expose you to what the city is required to comply with, and then gather questions to make sure that we are all on the same page moving forward here.
Can I
So,
ask you a clarifying question?
absolutely,
So in the absence of standards within the city of Hubbard,
yes.
does that defer then to county standards, or is there a state standard that gets applied?
For these particular bills.
Yeah.
So the state ORS, the Oregon Revised Statutes would apply.
Would
for
apply then,
these
okay.
applicable sections, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first section is the definition section. There's a few things in there related to daycare facilities, just to bring those into compliance. He's also gone in and updated all of the dwelling unit type definitions to match what you find in the Oregon Revised Statutes. I want to point out among those dwelling types that he's updated are manufactured dwelling. Over the years, there have been different terms used for, mobile homes or residential trailers, manufactured homes. They are not all the same, and there are different definitions included in the Oregon Revised Statutes, and he's called those out here. And then he's also included the definitions for a residential care facility and a residential care home. Those come directly from the ORS as well. I believe we do have a couple residential care homes in Hubbard that we've been aware of over the past few years. And then after the definition section, what Scott has done is he's gone into each of the zones in Hubbard and he's proposed revisions to those zones. And so what you'll see, for example, is that, say in your R1 zone, he's added a single room occupancy to the list of permitted uses. And then he's also provided the exact text where that comes from the legislation and in the ORS. He's also gone into the dimensional standards for each zone and he's adjusted the minimum lot sizes. So that, for example, a duplex would have the same lot size as a single family home. And a single room occupancy would have the same minimum lot size as a single family dwelling. So you'll find the same language there for R1 zone as well as R2 zone. And then also the R3 zone. One thing I wanted to discuss in more detail with Scott, because I'm not crystal clear on this, is the minimum lot area for townhomes based upon the underlying zone. And I want to make sure that we're all clear on where those are coming from, whether it's 2,500 square feet or 3,630 square feet, and whether or not there's 2 or 3 allowed. So that's a point of clarification that I want to make sure that we get.
Which page do you see the 3630 on?
So for the R1 zone, I believe for a townhome, it is 2,500 square feet. Here, let me scroll back here. So on page 21.
Yeah, there it is.
On page 21, it has 3,500 square feet for each townhouse. And then in the development standards, it says no more than 2 townhouses connected. And so that's for the R1 zone. And then the R2 zone for a townhouse, he has 2,500. And then no more than 2 units connected. And the R3 zone, he has 2,500 per unit. And then the single room occupancy is 3,630. So I want to confirm those details, and I'm sure he'd be happy to come in and talk through those some more. But I just want to make sure we're on the same page with those.
Question for you on that.
Yes, sir.
Is there a minimum house size for a single family unit or for a townhome before we designate it an ADU versus a townhome?
Right. I don't believe Hubbard has a minimum size for a single family dwelling. Some communities use 850 square feet. Vicky, are you aware if Hubbard has a minimum size for?
That's something we could add though, to prevent maybe a squeezed townhome going into a 7,500 square foot lot.
Yeah, so, yes, that is something that we could add. Hubbard code does not currently have anything. So I do want to clarify too, that, there is going to be an opportunity to revise, Hubbard code even more. I would like to get some sort of kind of design standards, talk a little bit more about driveways and requirements there, what temporary signage really means, that kind of stuff. That's gonna take a lot more kind of discussion and strategizing of what we want our community to look like. So that would be something definitely that we would probably want to include. It is just, it's not included in our current code.
Yeah, I mean, I read this, it just seems like the state's taking complete control over the cities to be able to define what they want to look like, feel like, et cetera. We have a development with 55 acres. I don't want to see it being a big mobile home park, for lack of a better term. And I don't want to see it just jammed full with a bunch of townhomes,
Right.
which would just be horrible. So I mean, it would be great to see how we, as a planning commission, as a city council, can put in whatever we can. I don't want to necessarily use the term barriers, but something to allow us at least to maintain some control over what we want Hubbard to be.
I have a quick question also.
Sure.
The single room occupancies covering like the small houses.
No, I think it's designed or intended more to be like group homes.
Okay. So that might be something the city thinks about adding also, as they talk about this in the future, is defining what those small houses are and.
A minimum square footage even again.
Yeah.
I do know we had one group home, I don't know if it still is, right off of, what was that, Third Street and G Street. We had a group home there for a while, I don't know if it still is or not. But again, as the larger homes, especially the historical ones, I could see people in the future wanting to splice those into single occupancy roomed houses, sadly. Portland did.
So I hear, a couple times now, the question about the minimum house size for single family homes specifically.
And not to jump ahead, but another question I had, because I did get a chance to read all of the highlighted ones, and for me, it was great, because I'm not
Amazing.
colorblind. So I
Amazing.
don't jump through and look at it quickly. There was a provision in there on manufactured homes next to a historically designated home. Does Oregon have a definition of what is a historically designated home?
Yeah, so the State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO, has a listing. They have an entire website database of all the properties that are eligible and then also listed and like federally recognized. And so
So it has to be state approved. Hubbard can't come up with its own registry.
it's a good question.
Just again, trying to see if we can protect even the
Right.
whole downtown core
Right.
and not have a bunch of. Don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
manufactured homes are actually fantastic now. They're built to the higher standards, sometimes even stick-built ones.
Yeah.
But again, I did see that in there and I was like, well, Hubbard doesn't have any historically designated properties that I know.
Yeah, I think you're probably all aware that the historic designation is kind of, comes with a bit of a burden, because once you're listed, you have to comply with certain design standards to ensure that the materials you're using are, you know, historically accurate to that period, and so sometimes it can be a bit more. work.
And that's why I'm curious if we could designate it even within Hubbard, what's
Sure.
a historical property,
Or a historic district or something
or whatever
like
it
that.
might be.
So the question.
And
would
what's
be-
the age need to be? We designate houses that were built in the 70s as now historical homes, because they're what, 70, 50 years old now? I don't know what the age is.
Oftentimes 50 is a trigger, but I mean.
There you go. I mean, that can.
So the
again,
question is, what would it take for Hubbard to have either its own designation or a district?
Right, just seeing whatever we can do to at least exert some control over what seems to making us a powerless option on a lot of this stuff.
Historic designation or even a district.
And I think it's very timely to also bring up the coding, as we were talking about quite a while ago, Mr. Wade, about how do we handle, you know, even incoming commercial district buildings, et cetera? Can we put in some sort of
Mhm.
requests on what we want it to look? Again, it goes back to the look and feel, so we don't have just run-of-the-mills 70s strip malls going in. We Make it look nicer.
Right.
Oh, great stuff we're lining up for the planning commission.
Thinking about the lot there. I don't know. These islands.
As Sean mentioned, there are a number of revisions that we would like to see for the Hubbard Development Code. You know, we always keep a running list. We approached DLCD to see if we could slip those into this package, and the answer was pretty firm that if it's not related to housing, then they won't be funding it. So we will try again in the future for those extra revisions. Okay, so let's see, moving on here. I think we know we need to resolve information about minimum lot sizes for both the townhouses and the SROs. Some communities have limits on how many townhouses can be connected in a row. A lot of small towns say only 2 or 3 in a row.
Question for our fire chief who's in here, is there any requirement from a fire preventive measure? I mean, we saw not too long ago, Wilsonville having quite a firestorm kind of breaking out there from all their townhomes burning one after another.
Yes and no. So the situation in Wilsonville was a little different because they were under construction. Typically, buildings in the process of construction or being demolished are at significantly higher fire risk than buildings under normal operation. My first thought is no. You can string as many of them together as you want. It would be similar to fighting fire, like a storage unit, for example, because they have so many units stacked right next to each other. We would have to alter our tactics a little bit when it comes to fire suppression, but it's not something that it's unheard of for us to do.
This is a possibility, and again, this might go back to city code to require greater fire prevention or fire blocks between the two buildings or the rooms that are connected.
Yeah, there would be construction features that would be required, so fire blocking, so firewalls, fire door, rated doors. And you see them a lot. You'll see in duplexes, especially like in the Portland area, you'll see a common wall that rises up higher. That's the firewall.
Yeah.
Marion County requires that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And now I know what those walls are.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the building code, I think, is pretty strict on the firewall, right? In
Yep.
terms of
They have
the 2
requirements.
hour or 3 hour, I don't remember.
Yeah, it depends on the occupancy and
If there's a concern about the number of units strung together, we can talk about, you know, one of the ways we feel that pinch is off-street parking can often get really congested when you have units that are really tight together. And so we can talk about, you know, how much off-street parking is required and how is that counted? Are we counting the garage as off-street parking or not? Because if we fill our stuff, you know, our garage with stuff, then functionally we're down to 1 parking space, and then you have a curb line with lots of breaks in it. So we can also talk about how our townhouse is connected, what counts as a townhouse. Some codes require it to be a habitable space, like a living room or something connected, as opposed to a garage, or some communities allow kind of like a shed, kind of lean-to. So there's different ways we can think about trying to get the breaks in the townhomes as well, if that's a concern.
It's not too much of a concern to me, and just looking for other areas that, again, that we can somehow exert some control
Yeah,
when something comes to the planning commission for review.
yeah. There's also standards about the amount of lot coverage that you have and how much private space each townhome has. I believe that the Hubbard Development Code already does have that
Yep.
standard in there, so that's another standard you can look to. Okay, so moving through here. page 48 and 49. Scott has updated the code related to manufactured home construction standards. And this is typically where you'll see, you know, what year or newer, the home needs to be. So there are a lot of standards in there that may not be allowed anymore. And so he's provided some highlights in there as well. Most importantly, he's provided on page 53. So you'll remember the piece about how housing developments need to be reviewed by criteria that is clear and objective and is not allowing discretion when it comes to these housing developments. And so Scott noted that, in fact, while 1 and 2 family developments are allowed just with a building permit, your multifamily housing still is required to come to the planning commission with a site development review. And that's a type 2 application that requires a public hearing. And so what Scott is saying here on page 53 is that if you're going to require, there's 2 routes here. If you're going to require a site development review for multifamily housing, then your criteria need to be clear and objective. Or you can ensure that multifamily housing don't use these criteria for site development review, and they have a separate set. And so he kind of lays out, there's 2 different tracks you could go with that. If we're feeling confident that the adopted criteria for site development reviews are hitting the mark in terms of what we need to see, then maybe we have a separate set of criteria for multifamily housing developments. Because these have a lot of room for discretion. And so that's something to think about as well. At the end of the packet, Scott has provided an example from the city of Jefferson. And what he's provided are clear and objective design standard examples for single-family dwellings, manufactured homes on individual lots, and duplex dwellings. And what we typically call these is kind of a you-pick menu. And other cities nearby have this. City of Donald has a you-pick menu where you have, say, 10 options, and the development of the single-family home has to have at least 5 or 6. And the obligation is on the developer to identify them on the plan set and check them off on the application. And so that's one option that you can use because they're all laid out.
So question for you on this one.
Yes.
And again, it goes back to, I believe, more statutes that were passed.
Uh-huh.
It's under my understanding that when a developer comes in, they can actually request waivers on specific criteria, and the city can't push back on that? Is this one of those areas where they can actually come in with a waiver and say, we're not going to do any of this, you still have to approve?
Let the record know that the mayor mentioned 1537. So you're referring to 1537, and that was intended to, again, grant waivers for housing development. The recommendation, the formal recommendation is that cities not revise their development codes for that because it has a sunset date.
Okay.
And so if a developer comes in requesting a waiver, then we default to the statute.
Okay.
I do want to go into more detail about that because I think that's important, but I'm not an expert on it. But what I do understand is that we are recommending that cities not change their code because then you just have to rescind it or have it.
Perfectly fine. I'm just, again, more
Self-destruct.
concerned about, it just seems like more and more local control.
Right.
It's gonna take a while.
Right. I hear that.
But I do like the idea that I see other cities doing, at least my personal opinion is,
Yeah.
choose 5 of the 10,
Mhm.
you know, whatever it might be.
Mhm.
And it goes back to, again, design standards that we currently don't have that we need to put in.
So if that's important to planning commission and city council, you could certainly go down the path of, you know, pick your own from this menu. The options are clearly laid out. The developer is obligated to demonstrate compliance. I will say that some developers get kind of lazy and they make staff go on a wild goose chase through their plan set, trying to check all the boxes. But if you are firm and help them understand the obligation is on them to demonstrate compliance, then
It's not back to them.
right, it's, yeah, if they want their permits.
Now, I apologize to the planning commission and city council. I keep talking. I'm gonna let you all chime in here because it's definitely a commission for everyone's ideas.
Great question. Great points, yeah.
Right beforehand. Remember all the questions I was gonna ask. So what's the next step after this then? You take back our feedback.
Gathering all the questions.
And then eventually we'll have to have a public hearing on these changes. And hopefully we can get individuals in the city to actually listen so that they don't get surprised later on when there's certain developments come in and they think the planning commission is somehow just approving anything or the city council is just approving anything.
Right.
Which is a great thing for the town hall coming up on March 15th.
Yeah.
It's the 15th, right? Or is it 12th?
So the recommendation would probably be one more work session, then planning commission hearing, then city council hearing. How does that look for scheduling? So we're having a town hall in March. Would it be feasible to also have a joint work session, or is that just overloaded?
No, so I actually don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So the town hall is specifically, I want community members to come in informal, ask questions. I don't want to have then a formal public meeting either right before or after. So I prefer to keep those totally separate. I think Vicky and I are gonna need to talk because we're going into budget development as well. And
Yeah.
so I don't know how many special meetings council wants to have.
Do we have a timeline on this
Yeah, we
from the
do.
state? What is the timeline from the state's perspective?
So.
We need to wrap it up in June.
June.
Well, it's gonna sit on top of the budget stuff anyhow, so we might as well just see where we can fit it in. And, you
Yeah.
know, poor Counselor Zadi and Michelle can yell at me later.
Well, so let Vicky and I go through, kind of our calendar, figure out like what's hitting where and what has to
Yeah.
go. Our council agendas are extremely packed,
Yeah.
through June, so I'm trying to have not so many special meetings.
Understandable.
Well, if we can make as many as hybrid as possible, because I also know that we have planning commission members who probably will have conflicts and be able to attend as well.
Right.
So if we can make it as hybrid as possible, to allow those that might even be in different locations, just to dial in, at least we can keep the process moving.
Absolutely.
Not that I don't like seeing everyone's face.
But does the work session, the next work session need to be a joint work session or one before the, how do you want to handle that?
It seems
So
productive.
the work ahead of us, is it like planning commission sort of purview to create a recommendation? So that the council can move forward with
Yeah.
something like that, but in between there has to be public hearing, what, two more times?
Yeah, so there'd be one public hearing with the planning commission, and then your recommendation goes from there to the city council for their public hearing.
Okay, makes sense. So if we do that, February is gone already. So you got March, April, May. You got 3 months left to get this done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm assuming, Director Noel's kind of tapping.
Oh, no.
Oh, gosh, see it. Maybe, I don't know what the calendar looks like, if we can squeeze this in time for the next planning commission to have it at the March meeting. If that's the case, then that can then roll from March into April for the city council. And then from April, if there's anything else left, we can still have May to get things out of the way. That should give us at least enough buffer, not to run up it. I'm assuming it's the end of June, not the 1st of June.
Yeah, do you, for a work session, do we want that to be both bodies together before we have the planning commission hearing?
I would say that's productive.
Okay,
Or
or,
we try to do that in March.
okay,
And that pushes from March to April, the next planning commission, where you guys make your recommendation, April to May for the next city council. Thus, we still have buffer going into the June. But it's gonna be rock solid and super cool, and it'll be in the day.
I want to make sure I captured all the questions tonight, and please, feel free to email, myself or Vicky if you have any more that come to mind.
So tentatively, planning commission should plan on another joint session in March.
Mhm.
So we can sort of flush out some of the questions
Yep.
that have been presented to you.
Yep.
As well as, I'm sure there might be other stuff that we need to look at too, so.
Yeah.
So just, so commissioners know that, plan on something in March.
So my question to you here is, if there's a certain lot size that's required already, why would we minimize or have a minimum square footage for someone wants to build a 500 square foot place on a 5,000 square foot lot? What's your thinking on that?
My thinking on this one is we have a minimum square footage of what, 7,500 square feet. I think is the minimum, right?
Yeah, 5,000.
And if we try then to squeeze on to, I don't know, 1,000-foot townhomes on one little one like that, is that acceptable? Or should we expect that that single lot have a minimum size for the house that needs to go on it for it? What I'm thinking of, I don't want to see a bunch of really small townhomes squeezed together.
So you're saying on a 5,000 square foot lot, you don't want 250 square foot, 3 units, 250 square footers?
Exactly. Is there something that we can do to at least make it to where we don't see ourselves just
Yeah,
right on top of each other?
right.
And it could also go back to design standards such as setback from the streets. 30% of the front can't be consumed by driveways or sidewalks. I mean, there's other things like that that can also play into it. So we might not even have to worry about the minimum size. And that's what we'll wait for city planner to come back with some questions on those.
So I think we do need to establish something, because what Chief mentioned about the smaller homes. What did you call them? They're not tiny homes, whatever you said.
ADUs.
No, the actual,
Single room occupancy?
yeah, the
Or
tiny
ROs?
homes.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
they're very small actual homes. They have their own kitchen, bathroom. But they're very small. I mean, they are like 300 square feet. They're small. So I think we do need to put something, do we want our whole new subdivision area filled with tiny homes? Or, I think we need to put some standards in there for that.
I mean, I can think of a worst case too, not a worst case, but what about even what they were doing with some of the homeless solutions in Portland, where they have a lot and put a bunch of basically ADUs on there. Technically, could that not
That's not-
be a bunch of SRUs if they put a single kitchen for them all to share?
So tiny homes, maybe I'm wrong, but tiny homes had to be connected to a primary residence the way we deal with them now, is that correct? Like a
How we deal
mother-in-law's.
An ADU. He's-
They're
That's
ADUs, and
ADU.
so technically the kind of the definition or state standard, and so a lot of, that's part of the solution for some of the unsheltered community is that they do have their own individual, it's a smaller home, it's like 500 square feet if that. It does have restroom facilities, a kitchen, it's not attached to anything, it's its own little home.
Yeah.
And so I do think that we need to, discuss that and
Yeah.
get some standards around that.
Yeah, because I can see a single room occupancy type thing where you have a central unit just spurring off into a bunch of rooms surrounded by a common kitchen. Technically, that would probably fall in line with what we're looking at here even. I can see a developer coming in and saying, hey, we can do this, why not?
Mhm.
Or even put gabled roofs on it. I mean, who knows? I just want to know, I guess to me, I'm very concerned about how as a city, from the planning commission to the city council, have any control over the design, feel, fit for that community.
So what would the square footage be? I mean, what?
TBD, I don't have a suggestion. yet.
Yeah,
Your ADU section is on page
I think
46,
it's 500.
the
no,
standard.
it's
verbiage.
800 for
Is it
ADU.
800?
No, we're talking about the small houses. What would the criteria be for a square footage? I mean,
I don't know, what's the recommended from the state in terms of a townhome? What's the smallest townhome?
In terms of the actual structure size,
Mhm.
that's a good question.
At least start somewhere.
Yeah,
I don't know.
you're right. Form the ideas now and then come up with solutions, because I can't. You know, if you own a property, you can do whatever you want with it as long as it's allowed.
Yep.
But yeah, bring up a good point, you could have. and
I've
you-
seen people come up with some
and-
crazy
and-
ideas.
And you brought it up, the tents come from Portland, it could happen, where people, you know, a family could do, you know, many small homes on one lot.
There's nothing to prevent them at this point.
Currently, your townhome, I believe your lot frontage width is 25 feet.
Okay.
Minimum. So that kind of restricts how tightly they can be packed in there.
Sure. Well, boy, can you imagine 4 townhomes in a 100-foot section? That would be tight.
You'd have to have them alley loaded.
Yeah, they would be going really
with
good.
the
But I mean, if
garage
you've
back.
driven between Dundee and Newburgh and seen those houses that are super skinny and super tall.
Actually, they're building them over there in, Woodburn,
Are they?
across from the new Tukwila development. I drove back there and some of them are very narrow. There's just like a garage and a front door on the front, and it just goes way back.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Which again, I mean, it's what we can do, but can we still control at
Right.
some point what the look of the city is gonna be?
Right, right. And I don't know what the
And I don't know what the
market.
answer necessarily
They
is.
put in some of those super skinny homes over by the fairgrounds in Canby. There's a small lot there. They put in a whole bunch of super skinny homes with the garage on the bottom, the living unit on the top. But you're asking about the ADUs. Right now, we only allow 1 per single family residence, and must be a minimum of 300 square feet, maximum of 800 square feet. So that's our current standards anyway on that, on the ADUs. Just kind of looking that stuff up. But yeah, they did that up in Canby here not too long ago, those skinny houses.
And now my assumption then as well, I had another concern, and that was what prevents us from basically mobile home parcels moving in. You can see it in Donald today as well. Not against them, they look nice over there as well. But in this case, it would go back to that choose one design from whatever it might be, and if you're building a house, or if you're setting a house there, it still has to comply with the standards that we're putting.
Mhm.
As long as it meets the same expectations that we have for stick built.
Right. But then you also have to agree as a body on the value of items on that list.
Yes.
Do we value dormers? Do we like shutters? Do
Whatever.
we like a certain percentage of breaks in the facade? I mean, you could go down a rabbit hole on those.
I don't even want to get too crazy.
Right.
But I think, again, something that can at least give some control to the planning commission to be able to have some say when something's coming to them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're just a rubber stamp, whatever comes forward, we can't do anything.
Yeah, I don't want to go as far down as being like an HOA, but,
Curtains must be.
garbage cans must be set back behind it.
All right. I've captured a lot of questions tonight. Please, keep sending them to us if anything else occurs to you. I know this is gonna keep you up at night. But we're happy to answer them. I'll make sure that Scott comes with me next time. He's the expert. We can put him in the hot seat.
I do appreciate it. Is there any other discussion or topics or questions that we might have for Holly before we?
I would just say if you have any examples of existing code that exists in another municipality.
Yep.
That sort of
It helps a
encapsulates,
lot.
that would help, because then we'd have like language to look at,
Perfect.
as an example. I just know that sometimes when we see other, you know what I mean, how others have dealt with it,
Mhm.
not that we can modify, but sometimes,
I think reuse is
sometimes there's
good.
some really good stuff.
Yeah, you can glean their wisdom. you
Yeah.
know, it's
There's
great.
no reason to reinvent the wheel and then pay a lot of money for you to go and reinvent that wheel.
And again, you can also see the results too, like
Right.
what kind of community, how they, you know, how they developed over the years based on what they have.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I had the same thing. You gave us the city of Jefferson, Oregon example, which was really good. You'd mentioned Donald had something similar, and I'd like to see that again. I'll see that as well. And so that way you have some comparisons there, and anybody else out there that you're aware of that we might be able to gather information from.
Holly, Albany also has, it is a parcel lot that has probably 15 tiny homes on it. So I don't know what their code says, but it might be something to look at.
Yeah. A couple years ago, cottage cluster developments
Yeah,
were
that's what it is.
popular and that, and we can certainly consider that as well.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, again, those are all things that I can just picture in my mind, and developers come up with crazy things. So, and it's not, they're trying to maximize their profit, and I can understand that, but
Yeah, and just as an example, here in our own town, over there by Andrew Commons, we had a bunch of duplexes, and they split the lots in long, skinny lots. They met the minimum square lot size, but yeah, now those duplexes are actually on two separate lots, and they're just, I don't know what you call them, townhomes or whatever, but they split them apart and got some really odd shaped skinny lots out of that.
okay, is there any other discussion on this topic? Okay, next one will be adjournment. You want to make a motion?
I'll file a motion to adjourn.
Okay, we have a second.
A second.
And like Glenn likes to do, is there any discussion on adjournment? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. We are adjourned. Thank you all. But we'll get it on it. Stay on. I don't use it. Trying to-
We need Chris and video. I literally told him.